Hey there, it's Kari from StudioR12 Stencils, and today we're going to show you how to stack your stencils and your surfaces to make a really awesome project. Are you ready to get started? We have lots of elements going into today's project, so let's show you what we're starting with. Our surface today is going to be a tag, and it is a pretty large surface because we have a lot that we are going to do with it. We are going to base coat it. We are going to stencil on it. We are adding a cow-shaped surface to it. We are painting on the cow, and then we have one of my favorite new products, our little cow ear tag, and then we are going to stencil on it. So we have stencils, we have layers, we are going to get started. When we are painting farmhouse, so farmhouse really encompasses a large variety. We have hundreds of stencils in our farmhouse collection that can be anything from just a hello in a particular font to a farm themed project. So today we are doing farm themed with our cows, but we are going to keep farmhouse in mind. So when you think about farmhouse decor, I think of white walls, shiplap, really neutral colors or dark burnt reds and oranges. So when we are working on our color palette for today, we'll use the white and black with our cow, but I wanted to stay away from using white on the background. If you'd have white walls and then put a white background, your project is just going to sink into the wall. So we're just doing a really light gray. We're adding in a little bit of green for our stenciling. And then with our cow tag, the ear tag, we looked at some different pictures. They come in a lot of different colors, but we decided to go with the yellow that was still in our color palette for our farmhouse decor. So the first thing we're going to do is base coat our project. This is a gray that we don't use a lot. It is number 23. If you grab the StudioR12 Paint Color Guide, it will tell you the numbers that we shout out here, like number 23. It'll show you what color it is, and it will tell you a corresponding color for Deco Art and a corresponding color for Sherwin-Williams. We get our paints from Sherwin-Williams, and they are house paint, but we paint in bulk. And so to use tiny 2-ounce bottles of paint, we go through them very quickly. So we get larger containers that are sample sizes, they're this size, and then we fill them in the honey bottles, which we get from Amazon. So I'll share all the links to all the things that we are using today and products we're discussing in the description below. So as we are base coating, we're doing nice long strokes. And you'll notice that when we get to the edges, when we get to the edge close to me, I pull it toward me. And then when we get to the edge far away, I push it. And there is a reason for that, because if you push against the edge or pull, depending on where your edge is, you can cause a mess along the edges. The surfaces that you get from StudioR12, we offer lots of different shapes and sizes of surfaces. They are laser engraved, so they have a nice black edge around the edge of it. And so you are most certainly more than welcome to paint your edges whatever color you would like. I like to leave mine black. And so I just did what I said not to do, and when I came across this edge, I pulled. So now I have a bit of paint on the edge of my black that I'll show you how to touch up before we finish up today. So we have one layer done, and I am going to hit this with the blow dryer, and I do think I want more of a bold look on this. So I'm gonna do a couple more layers and then we'll come back and start to stencil. So I ended up doing 2 coats of paint on the tag surface. And then once I saw how strong and bold the gray paint was, I decided that I do want to do a little bit of sanding just because I think it'll fit the theme better for our cow project. So I'm just grabbing a sandpaper here. We have a bunch of different grits. I just grabbed whatever one was nearby. I think it's a 100 grit. So I'm just going to go back and forth on my project just to rough up the paint a little bit. And when I sweep my hand, I'm sweeping off the sandpaper and paint bits that build up. And I'll go all the way across. When you are sanding, you do want to go in the same direction for all of your sands. If you want to do them this way, that's fine. Just do it in the same direction that you painted, and then paint and sand in the same direction. Oh. I'm going to come a little bit harder in here on the corners. Just do a little bit extra of a roughing up. We have a lot that's going to go on the background of this project, so we don't need to rough it up too much, but it just kind of knocked back that paint a little bit just to make it more in alignment with our theme. So let's do what we're gonna call as a dry fit to see where things are going to go. We have our cow surface, and we have our welcome to our farmhouse stencil. So we've been on a cow theme lately. We have a fun new collection of cow shapes and stencils. Highland cows are the popular trend right now. We have a Highland cow video that I will share with you that is super cool, that we have a surface and a layered stencil. And so we decided to kind of stick with this farmhouse theme. So as you're putting things together, with the Highland cow, the cow face comes down to off the edge of the project. I don't want that with this. I want the cow to stay on the project. So that means as I'm lining up my stencil, lining up my cow, I want to make sure that there is space and room for both of them, also without letting the stencil come off of the edge. And I am using, you can use a T-square to measure and line things up if you wish, or you can just eyeball it. All of our stuff is laser cut, so all of our lines are super crisp and clean, and I'm just gonna eyeball where I want this. So I'm going to go ahead and tape down my stencil, even though I'm not necessarily ready for that. I just want to know where it's going to go, and then we'll push it off to the side. So next is our cow. So let's talk about research. We researched colors, we researched farmhouse decor, we researched different cow projects just to see how colors and color schemes work together, what is popular trend-wise right now, and then we're even looking up, is a cow white with black spots or black with white spots? Like, those are silly things to think about that you might want to look up, but the reason we look that up is because I would prefer to paint a black cow with white spots, because the etching outline of this is black. So if you can paint a dark background to do that, then you have less chance of a mess. However, it is easier to paint black spots over a white background. And Steve did the research, and he said that cows typically look white with black spots. So we are getting some white paint, and for our wood embellishments and cutouts, we like to use the Jumbo Dauber. The foam brush works really great for large surfaces like our tag, because it can take up more space, but for smaller ones, we like to use the Jumbo Daubers. We are going to put some paint on, just do a little bit of a tap off. You do not have to do that depending on what size of project you are working on. The larger the project, the less important it is to get all of the paint off. But with our Jumbo Dauber, it is a dense foam that is domed. We love a dome shape here. And there's a spot in the back for your fingers, and you just put your paint on and tap, 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 and it covers a lot of area for you. And we love it because once you get to the edges, you can determine how close you are to the edge, and it gives you such a cleaner edge than if you are trying to do it with a foam brush or a dome stencil brush. I have tried it both ways, and trust me by saying this is the easiest way to do it. If you make a mess along the edges of, say, our tag surface, you can take a sponge, which we'll show at the end, and clean it up easy. If you make a mess right in this little crevice of the ear, it is going to be a little harder to clean up because it is such a tight point. Okay, so we have one layer of white done. And if you have never used a foam brush or a jumbo dauber and you look at your first coat and you're like, oh my gosh, it looks terrible, that's okay. We will do multiple coats on this so we can get it the brightness and the thickness that we want it to be. So I am going to blow dry this because it is wet. We'll get it nice and dry. You can go back through and sand it to take away any of the texture. Sometimes when you use the foam brushes to tap, or when you use a dome brush to stipple, you might see a little bit of a texture there, and not everybody likes that on their projects. So that is always an option. So grabbing our sandpaper, we will just lightly go over the cow. We'll smooth it down a little bit. Wipe it off so we don't have any little junk on it, and then we will come back into our paint and do our second layer. And you can already see with just a little bit of paint on the top here that this is evening out quite a bit. And the same thing happened with our background of our tag. The first layer was a little splotchy, a little patchy. We had someone message us the other day and say, I stenciled, but it's not looking real great. What did I do? And so they sent us a picture, and they didn't do anything. There was nothing wrong with it. It just needed a couple more layers of stenciling to make it more even. So I'm not certain if you can see this on camera, but I can see it here. Something to think about when you are stenciling, when you are base coating, regardless of the applicator you're using, if you have a wet surface and you continue to add paint to it, it is going to dig a hole. We have a whole video on how to not dig holes and how to fix them if that happens. But there are a couple areas here where the paint was wet, and I kept trying to apply more paint to it, and so now I have a little spot. So when that does happen, you can go through and sand. That second layer of paint definitely made it a little more even, but we are going to do at least one more. Something to think about is with this project, it is a cow and it is a hairy project, so you could leave some of the splotchy and texture on there to make it more of a natural look for the cow, and that's just going to be personal preference. All right, so look how much better this project looks after 3 coats. So it did take a little bit. This is a labor of love. When you are done with your brushes and you're done with the color, you're going to throw them in a bucket. And with our foam brushes and our dome brushes, we stick them brush side down. With the jumbo daubers and our ink sweepers, our sponges, we will put a paintbrush in where you had your fingers, and we will shove that in the bucket. You want the sponge part to be paint side down so that it does not flip over, and that's why we put the paintbrush in it as a weight. So that will keep it nice and saturated. If it flips up on its side or flips up and the sponge is on the top of the water, then it will dry out and your sponge will get crusty from where the paint dried. So this is how you can keep your sponges clean and able to use over and over again. All right, so let's get into stenciling our cow. So with our Highland cow, we have our surface, and then we have a layered stencil that you can paint the shape of the cow head, and then you can paint the hair on the cow. With this one, we are going to use our cow print stencil. This comes in several sizes. However, I got this one big enough that I could cover my whole cow surface and not move it. So one of the beauties of our stencils is they are repeating patterns. So if I was going to do this on the background of this project rather than on the cow, I could start it here at the bottom, and then once I got up here, I will just move the stencil up, and this pattern at the top and this pattern at the bottom match up so that you can paint it wherever you want. If you're wanting to paint a really large surface or a wall or a pattern on the floor, a lot of our patterns are repeatable, so you are able to do that. With this one, we could have gone with some smaller cow spots, but I decided I just want to take away the moving of it, and we're just going to do it as one. So you do have a couple of options for painting the spots on this. Since they are large areas, you can use your jumbo dauber again. We don't typically stencil with a jumbo dauber. However, these are really large areas, so it is the easiest way to cover a large area. I am going to tape my stencil down to our table because it is pretty big. However, I'm also going to tape it just here in the corner, and then once I get to the corner, I will go ahead and move it because I don't want my cow moving under my stencil. So we're just going to tape it in a couple spots. We're not going to push down the tape really hard because our paint is fresh. So I'm going to do a portion of it with the jumbo dauber, and then I'm going to do a portion of it with the dome brush so you can see the difference. So our gray that we used for our background was 23, our white is 27, our black is 28. So I'm going to get a new paper towel here. Since we are stenciling, I got some paint onto my inks or my jumbo dauber, and I am going to come over to my paper towel and offload, because if you are not offloading, just like we do with our dome brushes, you're going to have too much paint and you can bleed under with the jumbo dauber. So I'm just going into the holes and doing a really light, dusty layer. And if you are new around here and you are questioning why I am putting my paint on my paper towel and not just coming to my project, it is to help prevent the bleeding under. If you put the paint on your applicator and go straight to your project, you're going to have entirely too much paint. It is going to seep under. We get so many questions about, I'm bleeding under, why? I did what you said. However, once they go back and look, maybe they did not offload enough. And once I start using the dome brush, I'll give you a trick to determine if you are offloading enough. So when would you use a jumbo dauber to do your stenciling? This is only going to happen when you have big open spaces like this. We absolutely do not use it when we are stenciling like our welcome to our farmhouse that has a lot of letters. They are small and there's just a lot going on. But in the open spaces, this is the easiest way to get it done quickly and evenly across the board. So I'm going to set this over to the side. If I was going to take a while, I would put it in a baggie, but I'm just going to show you what it looked like to use a dome brush, and then I'm gonna come back to my jumbo dauber. So I have paint on my brush. My brush is new. I kind of hate to put black paint on it. And then I'm coming over to my paper towel, and you can either do a swirl motion or a back and forth motion 10 to 15 times. To determine if you have enough, or if you have offloaded enough, you come to your hand on your palm, and then you can swipe it. You can hardly see any paint. It is not wet, it is not goopy. If it looks like this and it's wet, you have entirely too much paint on your brush and you will likely bleed under. So if that is the case, if it looks wet and feels wet on your hand, you come back to your paper towel, and then you do it again, and there's hardly any on there. And then you come to your project and you are very lightly swirling. We are hardly applying any pressure here. Another way you can tell if you have too much paint on your brush when you come to your project is if you can see the brush strokes from your swirling. If there are swirls on the background of your project where your paint is, that means you have too much paint. It's a really good way to tell. You can go back to your paper towel. Oh, that was on there pretty hard. You can go back to your paper towel, and then you can offload a little bit more. I'm gonna come up here. So the jumbo dauber did apply a little bit more of a thick layer. Let's pull this back. We did not have bleeding under for either of them, so it's really a preference for you, what you prefer to use. I didn't hate using the dome brush here. I think maybe I preferred it more than the jumbo dauber just because I am used to using the dome brush a little bit more. So I think what I'll do is I'm gonna sink this dome brush, or sink my jumbo dauber into the bucket, and I'm going to finish this cow with the dome brush. One nice thing about doing these light dusty layers is that when you have a project like this, it's not very big, but it is big enough that when you go from top to bottom, then it will be dry, likely, if you are offloading enough, so you can automatically just go back up to the top and not have to worry about waiting for it to dry. So once we get down here, we'll be able to continue our next layer. So I am still swirling on this project. Since we want a bold look on our cow spots, if bold is what you're going for, after I do a couple layers of swirling, I will do a layer of stippling, and that is going to be personal preference. Patty hates stippling. I like, when I want a bold look, I want it to be really bright and bold, and I think the best way for me to get that is by stippling. So after I do a couple of layers, I will go in and stipple. However, once you do start stippling, you do have to keep in mind that you are applying more pressure and you have more paint in your brush because you are pushing the paint in. So that is something that you have to keep in mind, because when you stipple, you can increase your chances of bleeding under because you are putting more pressure on there. Let's get this last spot. I don't feel like any spots look like they're wet, but since I am going to stipple next, I'm gonna go ahead and blow dry just to be sure everything is really dry, and then we will get our last layer on. So when you have a stencil that has a lot of moving parts like this, peeking is a good idea so you can make sure you aren't bleeding under. You may have noticed as I'm going along, I'm moving my finger as an extra anchor to the stencil just so that I don't have any extra wiggle room, especially since I don't have it taped down real well to my project. So now we are going back to our stippling motion, which is the same thing that we did with our jumbo dauber. And we are, so you can see already the difference in how bold it looks from here that has a layer of stipple compared to our swirled layers. Okay, are we ready for the big reveal? I'm gonna put my finger down here and lightly lift up. Ta-da! Look at our cow. Look how cute. It's amazing what a stencil can do. Can you imagine hand painting that? Patty has hand painted a cow project before, and I am more of a stencil gal, so I am very thankful to have this stencil today. Now, when looking at this, there are a couple spots that are more bold than some of the others. So one, I probably forgot to do a couple of these spots with my stipple, but that's okay. If you want it to be, if you're a perfectionist, I'm recovering. If you want it to be more seamless across the board, then you can put your stencil back on and do a couple more layers. Or if you want to go with that rustic theme, you can come in here and you can kind of just run your sandpaper through this, and then that will bring it to be a little bit closer to our surface, which we also ran the sandpaper through. So then it all kind of has the same vibe. So our cow, we are done with for now. We are going to come back to our surface and we are going to stencil. So this is a lot of small moving parts. So with our stencil, our welcome to our farmhouse, I am going to paint it a green. This is number 43. It's a neutral green. However, I'm not doing just green. I am going to do a black drop shadow underneath it so that the green really pops off of the gray background. So they're not, the gray and the green aren't super close in the color. However, I do want to make sure that the green doesn't fade into it. So when you drop shadow with stencils, let me show you the trick. You line up your stencil exactly where you want it on your project. You get your paint in the color that you want your main color to be. So our main color for our words is green. So I am just going to do a really light, dusty layer on my welcome to our farmhouse, because this is going to be a guideline for me. So we had someone on our YouTube channel the other day say, why didn't you just skip step 1 and go to step 2? So I'll show you what step 2 is, and then I will explain to you why I personally like to do step 1. Okay, so step 1, quick and easy, is done. I'm gonna peel this back and see we just have a really dusty layer of welcome to our farmhouse, exactly where we want it to be when our project's finished. So how do you drop shadow? You line up your stencil with your guide. And then to drop shadow, you are either going to lower your stencil and then move it to the left or right, or lift your stencil and move it to the left or right. I typically lower mine just a little bit, and then, so you're gonna lower it, and then I move it to the right. So it's not a lot, just a little, and you can see where your drop shadow is going to be compared to your letters, because that is now what is popping through this background. I am not going to paint my little stripes. I am not going to add a drop shadow on those. I'm just going to leave those green. I'm just going to drop shadow my words. So I'm going into my black. I am swirling, offloading. Oop, too much paint. Look at all those swirl marks on there. That is entirely too much and can definitely increase my chances of bleeding under. I am holding down my stencil in a couple of places. Some of these letters are pretty big, and I want to make sure that my stencil is not wiggling any and that I'm not giving myself a reason to bleed under. So I said I wasn't going to drop shadow my stripes. Well, guess what? I wasn't paying attention and I ghosted underneath that area. So I am going to drop shadow my stripes because I don't want to peel off my stencil and fix that. So what you would do if you were paying better attention is you would use a mask. So you can tape off the stripes, or you can use one of our multi-maskers. So this is our StudioR12 multi-masker. I could have come right here and covered up my stripe, and that would have been an easy way to fix that. So I will show you what it looks like with the drop shadow on the stripe. And who knows, we may love it, but then you'll be able to see why I potentially didn't want to drop shadow the stripe in just the letter. Sometimes stripes and drop shadows, I don't love them as much as I do with the words. And you can also see that I have not applied much paint to my brush. I have been swirling for quite a while. I am increasing the pressure that I'm using a little bit just because there's not as much paint on my brush. However, I'm still getting that really light and dusty layer of paint on my project. When you are going with a stripe like we have down here, I typically stop the swirl and just go in the direction of the stripe. When you get into areas that are long, if you are swirling and you are applying too much pressure, you can pull the stencil away. So we go ahead and we have our black, and I'm going to do one more layer just so my drop shadow is bold. I'm gonna go ahead and stipple here. Now when Patty does a drop shadow with the stencil applied, sometimes she only does a portion of the stencil because in her brain, she has done so many drop shadows, she knows exactly what part is going to be drop shadowed and what part is not. My brain is not there, so I just drop shadow the whole letter and then I will move the stencil back and we will cover it. Okay, I have all of my drop shadow layer down. I am going to blow dry before I move my stencil. Since we stippled, it is a little wet. You can see the paint's wet, so we're going to blow dry to make sure our paint is dry before we remove the stencil. If you remove the stencil and there's wet paint, if you aren't very careful about how you lift it off, you can drag wet paint on your project. All right, are we ready for the reveal? We're gonna remove our tape. And remove our tape. And we are going to lift straight up on our stencil and voila, welcome to our farmhouse in black. Now, let's make it how we really want it to look. We are going to put our stencil back on, and when you line up your stencil after your drop shadow, you go back to the spot that you did with your original color. So now I am lining up my stencil with my green. All right, coming back into our green, our number 43. We're using the same brush. We are offloading. I'm not coming into green yet. I am going to put this brush here because our green is really light. So let me show you what it would look like if I did green on top of this black. It's not terrible, but it's going to take a while to cover. So what happens if you're painting a light color over a dark color? We like to add in an extra step. We are going to bring in a little bit more gray. We're going to use the same gray as our background, and we like to use gray rather than white because depending on what color you're going to be painting over top of your dark color, the white could change the color. If you are using red, you never want to use white as your neutralized color because it will turn it to pink. So now what we're doing is we're going back over with our gray, and we are going over top of where we want our green just to help cover that black, and it will make our green pop a little bit more on the background. And when I do this, I typically only do one layer. I try to make it a really even layer on my project. A lot of times when you do the one layer, it is a little splotchy and you might not have much coverage. And it doesn't really matter because you are going to be covering it again. However, I have run into on one of my projects that it was a little splotchy and I painted yellow over it, and you could tell that it was splotchy because my yellow didn't cover as much as I had hoped for. So we do these projects and we do these videos and we tell you our mistakes so that you can know these are things we've run into. If you run into them, you are not alone, and we want to help you figure out how to fix them. Okay, we're ready to go back into our green. So I'm coming in here and I'm going ahead and stippling because we have a lot of ground to cover. And you can already tell the difference. I covered up the green just so it wouldn't look funny that a portion of it was undercoated and another portion wasn't. But I already feel like this green has a lot more pop than the green did over top of the black. And it's going to take less layers because we already have that lighter background. So let me get this done. I can't wait to show you the drop shadow. Okay, I'm not going to reveal this right now. I took a little sneak peek and I love it, but we're gonna paint the tag first. I'm using color 8 for the tag, and we're just gonna get a little bit because it is small. And let me see. Grab yourself a dish towel from the Dollar Tree or an old one that you're not using. And that is super helpful when you're painting teeny tiny surfaces or embellishments because your finger's going to take up a large portion of it. Your finger's probably going to get into the paint because this is really thin. A lot of the surfaces you get from us are 1/4 inch. This is 1/8 inch. It's meant to be smaller. So if you put it on this towel, it helps prevent it from wiggling. You can still hold on to it. You can hold on to the little tag top area. I am offloading my jumbo dauber just onto my palette paper. We use a reusable palette. We realized, well, we had a palette paper that we used that we loved, and then it became unavailable to us. And so we were trying to figure out what to do. And then we realized that our stencils are reusable. So let's try using our Mylar, and voila, now we have a palette paper that you can purchase in a single sheet or in a pack of 5. They come in really long portions, and I just cut off however much I think I'm going to need, store this away. This can also be used as a masker. We use these as masks on really big projects, on our tall porch signs. And then when you're done with it, you just wash it off just like you would with a regular stencil. We have a video on how to wash your stencils the right way so that they last a long time. You'll wash it off, reuse it, ta-da. All right, our tag is done, super easy, doesn't take long. You can do the same thing that you did with your cow, with your background, however bold or not bold you want it to be, can be determine how many layers you paint on it. I'm once again sinking my jumbo dauber into the paint. I'm going to put away my towel and let's talk about what we are going to do with our tag. So our cow goes on here. Our tag goes on the cow's ear, so you can do a couple of things with this. You could put a little screw through it. It does have a hole. You could put a little screw through here, or you can just glue it, and that's what we're going to do. However, cow tags have numbers, right? That's how you figure out what cow's what, who's Bessie and who's Bobby. So we got an alphabet stencil. This one in particular comes with an uppercase and a lowercase alphabet. It comes with numbers. It comes with your exclamation point and all that fun stuff. And I tried to get it in a font that was kind of country looking. So we have a lot of different fonts. We have a lot of different sizes for you to choose from. And we were just talking the other day about we don't use these as much as we should. We have so many alphabets, and this is what makes your stencils have endless options of what you do with them. You can personalize anything. You could do a big monogram on the cow here and do an M or a G, or you could write at the bottom of this Gibbs or whatever name that you would want to. So you could make anything personalized with these alphabets. So we are going to do a number 6. No particular reason other than that's just the number that I set down. And once again, we are going to just eyeball and line it up here where we want it. I'm going to go into my black paint. We just have a little bit left, and that's okay. I did not think about doing this prior to throwing my brush with the black paint into the bucket. If you do not have many brushes, you will want to think about your paint colors and your brushes as you are painting, because you have to have a dry brush before you paint. After you use your brush, you stick it in the water. Once you are done painting, you go wash your brushes. We have a video on it. And then you have to set them aside to dry. And that can sometimes take a day. So then you have to wait until they're dry. If your brushes are wet, when the paint gets on your brush, the wet brush will thin out the paint a little bit, and then that can cause problems and cause some bleeding under. So I'm not certain this is dry enough. We're gonna check. And I'm not getting very much coverage on my second layer here, which means I need to blow dry because my paint's not dry. And as you can see with this, I did not tape this stencil down. I am just holding it down. And now that I'm thinking about it, I chose the number because that's what cow tags have on them, ear tags. But I think when I was originally planning this project, I was going to use the G and make it a letter for my last name. So that kind of looks like a G. We'll leave it. But you could also switch it to the other side, paint it. You could re-base coat this and paint it to make it what you want it to be. So sometimes thinking out your projects before you start is always a good idea. All right, are we ready for the reveal of our Welcome to the Farmhouse? I cannot wait to see it. And ta-da! Look how fun that is. We have just a little bit of drop shadow. So now you see how the drop shadow works. And you have a little bit of black. I do not hate the drop shadow on the stripes. Even while I was painting, I told Steve, I don't think I'm gonna like this, but I don't hate it, and it brings it all in together. So there is, since there's several layers of paint here, so we think about it, we did 2 layers of black, a layer of gray, and then I did 2 layers of green. So this is raised a little bit. I'm going to go into my fine sand grit of paper, my 100, and just very lightly sand this. So you can't really hear it, but you can definitely feel it. When you go shopping and you pick up a sign to purchase, I feel it. I feel what it feels like. The left side of this where I sanded it, it's all flush, it feels nice and soft. The right side is a little raised from all of our paint layers. And since we're not using a really rough grit of sandpaper, we're not really pulling off the paint here, we're just smoothing out. Keep in mind, if you do drop shadow, and you have black, and then you have gray, and then you have green, if you use a really coarse sandpaper and you go through and sand, some of those other colors may start to pop through. You may pull away your green and your gray may come through. You may pull away both and your black may come through. So keep that in mind, that if you have multiple layers of paint on your project, then you might want to use a lighter grit sandpaper. Okay, before we glue everything onto our project, I did tell you I was going to show you how to fix the edges. I have a couple of spots around here that are yucky. So I grabbed a really tiny foam brush and I'm just gonna get a little bit of black paint and I'm going to come along my edge here and just use my black paint to help clean up my boo-boos. However, you have to be careful because my black paint went over the edge, and so now I have a little bit of black on my background. I can do a couple of things here. I can get a little bit of water on a paper towel, and since that paint is fresh, I can just rub it off. You can only do this within a couple of minutes. You will have to potentially get a couple different spots of your paper towel wet to do it so that the black paint doesn't smear. And there we go. So we're good to go. You can also take your sandpaper to the edge and just go right over that. Or maybe that's a happy accident and you realize you want to do a little more antiquing. So it is easier to just be careful when we are doing our base coating rather than to potentially get some paint along our fresh gray paint. However, there are ways to fix it. All right, let's glue. So I'm going to use the quick dry tacky glue from Aleene's. We love this one because it stands on its nose and it's ready to go ahead and come out. So I'm going to first put glue on the back of my cow head. I'm going to go along the inside of it. I am not going to go very close to the edge because when I stick it down, I don't want it to squeeze out. And because I've worked with Patty for so long, I am eyeballing this baby, and we are going to measure kind of by where the ears are. They look about even. We're gonna push this down and I'm gonna stick my tag on. Your tag, you could put a hole through the cow's ear on the surface and you could attach it that way, and you could put a ribbon on it. There's a lot of different options here of things that you could do. But now we're gonna let this dry and then we'll show you the finished project. All right, what do you think? We are super happy with how this turned out. We love the color scheme together. We love how much the drop shadow adds to the project. If you love this one as much as we do, make sure you subscribe to our channel, ring the bell so you can be notified anytime we add cool, amazing stuff to our channel.